Welcome to join us again at the Crosse Thinkers Podcast. And today we have Dr. Ingrid Van Duyne joining us, and we're going to talk a little bit about information on transgender and her research on transgenders. So we communicated through email before this. Would you mind just starting with reading a poem about one of the people you have seen before, who is transgender?
Absolutely. I think this poem really speaks to some of the struggles that people who identify as transgender experience. First of all, I'd like to give you a little background on Kai. Kai is not her real name. She actually transitioned and was born with a male name and changed to a female name. But then as a research participant, she changed it again to protect herself. She's actually in her early 60s and has only transitioned for the last less than 10 years, so transitioned later. She is a physician and a double board certified from the Midwest and from a very strict Lutheran family, and actually lost her wife, her family, her job, her housing, all of her possessions once she made this decision. Okay? And she's been looking for a place to live and a place where she can feel safe and accepted ever since. So she shared with me this poem. So this is an introduction to Kai. I'm a person like anyone else, full of dreams, life, and humility. I bleed, hurt, laugh, and cry like anyone else, but because I am seen merely as a derisive word, transgender, I am somehow less than. The 14th Amendment does not apply to me. I have been maliciously marginalized, discriminated against, and even denied health care because of my label, a flaming moniker first attached in 2005. I have been spared no expense to outwardly be regarded as female, and over the course of a decade, plus the knife has carved me in Colorado, Texas, Illinois, Massachusetts, Oregon, and California. It has not been enough, and gosh almighty, I wish this had not been my path or my cross to bear. My first gender change in 2005 started in the great state of Texas. I thought that the blueness and friendlier language of Colorado would have forecast a prettier picture for my second go-around with a gender swap. How wrong was I? People are pretty much the same whether they are from red states or blue states. The last 30 months of my life in a quasi-liberal blue college town has hardened me into a numb and repressed shell that only exists. I have come to regard my job as a daily struggle to survive the enemy's camp. I have raised my voice, sought to patiently educate and forgive the thoughtless utterings and personal slights and gossip of my coworkers. Alas, I have given up on my current work family. The barbs have been too numerous and deep, and there have been persisted for too long. I am not sure which is worse, smug indifference, being tolerated, casual, thoughtless dismissiveness, or blatant and undeniable discrimination. We all like labels, especially if we can gleefully hang them around the neck of someone else. Society likes to describe me as a transgender. I hate that word, as it is dismissive and pejorative. It invites a brand of harsh judgment that trashes and guts the very soul. The label certainly allowed others the opportunity to inflict a fair share of hurts on me, and our current polarized political climate only encourages injurious assaults. On paper, we would probably all agree that being overly judgmental and hypocritical of others is not a good thing, and we would find unity and agreement that a smile beats a fist to the face any day. Now, this is someone who goes to work, pays taxes, and has the same hopes and dreams and aspirations as everybody else. But I also know that many of the participants that I've worked with have lived in the liberal states, had a good primary health care provider, which is very important for people who've had these multiple surgeries, especially if they decide to go the entire route and have the upper if they're going from male to female, and the lower. Or if they're going from female to male and having the breast removed, the chest reduction and reconstruction, which is very intensive, and also the lower surgery as well. They really need the follow-up, okay? But a physician can deny them care. A physician can say, it's against my religion. I don't want to see you. And what's happened with Kai, and what's happened with a few other people that I have spoken to, and as I have told you before, I'm a researcher, and I've gone from the quantitative to the qualitative because my participants have asked me to. They have said, we get a lot of our information on Facebook, and a lot of it's not true. And we really want somebody to go out there and hunt for us and talk to us. But a couple of them have told me that then they would have to drive like hours to go find somebody, and it's on them to find another healthcare provider that will help them to get the medications that they need and the care that they seek. For example, they have to have hormones, either injectables and or patches or by mouth. Sometimes all three, depends on where they are in the transitioning process. So it's not something that can be taken lightly. So I just wanted to share that poem, Kai's poem, as a springboard to some of your questions, but I'd also like to say that I am not an expert in this. Even though I've been around people who identify as transgender for more than a decade, and when I say around, I don't mean just casually. I've joined their different organizations, and I've participated in their bi-monthly group meetings and participated in some of their parades and actually represented the people who identify as transgender in the Phoenix population 2 years in a row by walking in the parade and carrying the flags. Because many of them are like unicorns. Once they start to transition, and if they can pass, they quit going to the meetings, they quit going to the parades many times. They don't participate in the parades because there's such a stigma on the LGBTQ community, but also in particular on transgender, that once they feel like they can blend in, they fade away, which is sad.
Does it mean that basically they start to identify themselves as male or female after that?
Well, I would say, to tell you the truth, that what I've heard from them, and like I said, I am not an expert, okay? But what I've heard from the majority of the people that I've spoken to and said, when did you feel this? It's not when they're teenagers. It's when they are, right around nursery school, maybe kindergarten. They just feel like they are something that they were not born. Cisgender is somebody who identifies, such as myself, I identify as female, and I was born female, and the doctor said that's a female, and that's on my birth certificate. Somebody could be born female and have a name like Deborah and want to be called Luke and identify as male and say to her friends, wow, wouldn't it be great to be a boy? And really feel that way. And, sometimes this is a passing thing. I can tell you that my brother told my mother that he wanted lace on his, and he wanted to wear my clothes, and he and I used to play together, and he wanted to play with my dolls and all that. And we even renamed ourselves, he and I. I didn't have those types of feelings, but we even renamed ourselves. And then he wanted to move into my room, and he wanted to sleep in my bed. And it wasn't anything sexual. It was just that he was my brother, and he really liked the things that I had and the things that I could do and the things that I wore and things of that nature. But, within a year or so, that passed. It's not like he said, oh, I don't feel comfortable being in this body. people who identify as transgender increasingly become more and more distressed with the body that they are looking at and by the way they are being maybe addressed or treated by society. One of my participants told me that she would look down and she just could not stand to look at her penis, and would even think about cutting it off. I mean, that is somebody who truly, truly, truly believes that they were born in the wrong body. And that is it's the sentiment that comes across. I was born in the wrong body. Now, there are people who identify as transgender who choose to keep their parts that they were born with. And I don't call them their boy parts or their girl parts, because somebody who's transgender might have their original parts, male or female, and then want to refer to them as their gender of identity parts. Okay? It's how they see themselves. So the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Illness, okay, used to consider people who identified as transgender as a mental illness and something that could be quote-unquote cured. And that's when that conversion therapy and all that stuff was coming out, and people would put their children in there and different practices would go on, and I have research in folders on that. There was a lot of harm that would come from that, telling people that, that it was all in their mind and that this was something that they should be healed of, like it was a disease, and, or that it was some spirit or devil or something inside of them that needed to be gotten rid of. I mean, imagine being told that, you have something inside that's bad. It's like a cancer. Mm-hmm. It's like a blight, and you have to get rid of it by these different practices. I mean, that would make you feel, dirty or bad, or, self-loathing. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of that going on with people who are not accepted by society or who identify as something which might be considered other than. This is definitely a marginalized population. When we talk about marginalized populations and we think about different ethnic groups maybe, right? Mm-hmm. Or we would think about people in different socioeconomic groups. Well, this is also could be considered marginalized just by the way they're treated by society, by the way they're treated by, different fractions of society, like the military. Somebody could be born male, for instance, and want to go into the military, but then perhaps they would transition before or after. The Veterans Administration wouldn't appreciate that. The military, if you just, all you have to do is read the papers, what's going on with the military. Oh, should we allow them? Should we not? Well, I got news. They've been in there, but, they've been afraid to come out, and for good reasons. I mean, we're all born with self-preservation, and if you know that if you are out here and that people are going to be attacking you, you're not going to be standing up quite as tall. You're going to be trying to fade back. And that's what we've seen. Also seen how some of my participants have lost everything. Some of my participants that have transitioned from female to male, male to female, have lost their spouses. It's like, well, I didn't sign up for this. And their spouses will file for divorce, and they will take the kids, and the judges are very sympathetic with the spouses, and they'll take the money, they'll take the house, and somebody who shows up wearing a dress one day and then the next day comes in wearing male clothes and short hair and wants to be called a different name. Sometimes employers might not appreciate that, and coworkers. And even if they are allowed to keep their jobs, you heard Kai's story. Even though she was living in Oregon, which is considered extremely liberal. Mm-hmm. And I know that the town that she was referring to, because I interviewed her in that town, extremely liberal town. But the way she was treated, actually went into the facility where she was treated like that. And I walked around and just talked to people. Not about her, but just talked to people, like as an outsider.
Especially she's a physician herself. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's ironic.
I'm an occupational therapist, so I just went in and started talking with my peeps. And yeah.
Interesting. So back to the point, actually you address a lot of points along the conversation. Actually, my first question was actually, if some people identify themselves as transgender, do they have to go over the surgery to make their body look different? But they kind of address that. It's like some people actually hate their parts and want to get it removed. But it's also, there are another group of people who say, hey, I'm just going to behave, but I'm going to keep my body parts just because I'm not so against it, or actually I embrace it. Right, so that's actually the first question I have, which is great. You address that. The second thing I want to ask is actually, so when they go over this
Can I say this?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people can't afford this. It's a very expensive surgery, and it's not without complications. So many people just think about this. Think about, okay, for example, I need a knee surgery.
Mm-hmm.
I've needed a knee surgery for 20 years. But my family depends on me to support them, and my family depends on me to provide health care. So, and then I have one kid that's in medical school, another kid that's started college. So, I couldn't really afford to take the time off,
Mm-hmm.
So many of these people, the insurance...
That's actually my next question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did the insurance cover it? It's actually
So,
or can they actually refuse to cover this?
It depends on the state. There are some states and also in some prisons, the people can get their surgeries paid for. But then that opens up a whole new can of worms. Then do they stay in that prison, or do they then go to the prison where they are of their gender identity versus their gender where they were born? Okay, so society is not really ready for this, because it's happening very fast, and we can talk whenever you want to about the population, but
why don't we just do it now? Like, how large is the population of transgender people?
well, and that's the thing. I went ahead and I've flagged a few things on my research. I actually brought some of my manuscripts. I have 4 of them here. So one of them is published, one of them's coming out in December, another one's coming out later in the year. It's a special edition, and the other one's under review, but they've told me that it's going to be published. So I went ahead and brought them all. So basically, approximately 1.4% of people worldwide have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. So it's not identifying with the gender in which you were born. Okay, so that's how it's defined within the DSM-5. All right, but people who identify as transgender are a growing population in our society. Current estimates place the number of individuals identifying as transgender in the United States as 1.4. But then you have to say, well, why is that an estimate? Well, the reason why it's an estimate, the reason why it's unknown, is because there's such a huge stigma attached to this. And we talked about that. I like to think about them as unicorns, okay? As unicorns are unique and they're beautiful, but they're very elusive. And also, they're seen as mystical and also not true. So some people believe that people who identify as transgender aren't true. Like that's just something that they just decide. They just wake up one day and say, oh, I feel like being a girl. Oh, I feel like being a boy. And that's not the way it is, okay? So that's why I like to think about them like unicorns, just because I think it's a nice way for me to look at them without getting too upset about how they're treated, because I do care about my population. And as I'd mentioned to you before, just because I'm doing research on this particular population, because my research is actually in health disparities with marginalized populations, and right now I'm focusing on people who identify as transgender, it doesn't mean I necessarily agree one way or the other with this. It simply means that I believe that more research needs to be done, and more proper research needs to be done where we're actually hearing their voices versus people who are cisgender, who are born one way and identify with that, and just want to get on the bandwagon of this new research, and they're just going out and doing a whole bunch of just gathering data and reading a bunch of other stuff or literature reviews and just putting a bunch of stuff out there that is like, it's like when you do that game that's called telephone, where one person says a word and then they pass it around, and when it gets to the end, it's totally different. That's sort of what's happened here. When I talk to people who identify as transgender, they say, well, I'm hearing all this stuff about me, and it's not really true. For example, all people who identify as transgender and who go from the gender of their birth to the gender of their identity aren't gay. And they're not predators. They're not hanging out in bathrooms wanting to molest people. I mean, that's, and everybody's always talking about the bathroom issue. It's like, even in the political climate, when they were talking about rights, the next thing you knew, everybody's talking about the bathroom. It's like everybody has to pee. So why is this a big deal? They just want to go in and do their business. But if they're wearing a dress and they transition, they can't go into the male bathroom. And if they're wearing a suit and they've transitioned, they can't go into the female bathroom. So what are they supposed to do? Hold it? Not drink fluids? Because, by the way, if they've had the bottom surgery, they need to push fluids. So, I mean, really, it gets kind of ridiculous. So my point is that what I want to do is I want to stand up and I want to advocate for them, but also do proper research so that people who identify, who are thinking about having the surgery or thinking about transitioning, can make an informed decision. An informed decision is so important because, here we go again, every single one of my participants that I've spoken to, every single one of them who's had any surgery, whether it's feminizing, whether it's a chest reconduction or implants, and especially the bottom surgery, has told me that they didn't get good follow-up care, that if they asked questions, many times their questions weren't fully answered, that they weren't prepared for some of the complications that occurred, like urinary incontinence. If you think about the urethras being cut, okay, especially if you're going from male to female, you're losing, inches of urethra and many other things. But, it's just, they need to be able to have the information so they can make an informed decision. What they have found is that informed consent is consistently lacking. In my research, I actually have, references and I have citations for that, including my own. It's lacking. When I had my baby and I was feeling like I was having my first son, when I felt like I was having complications, I called my OBGYN and I said, look, I'm having this kind of weird feeling and I'm having, this going on. And, she called me back right away. One of my participants in this, it's a case study that I did, which is the one that's under review right now with the Journal of Life Care Planning. She actually had her bottom surgery. She went from male to female, was having some bleeding, was worried about the bleeding, called the office, didn't get a call back, and 2 weeks later when she went in, then it was addressed. And I said to her, they didn't call you back? And she's like, no. And so finally, after just gently, talking and prodding a little bit, it came out that she was so grateful that she was even just seen and had that done, that she didn't want to impose or push.
That's terrible. Yeah, I can relate to the story you told about your have given birth to a baby. My wife is going through exactly the same situation. Every time, even a little tiny thing, the baby just wake up too much, you can call. Yeah. They call back right away. And because you're just panicking, right? What's going on? This is new to me and everything. But listening to that story, it actually shows me two information. Number one, they're not treated in the appropriate way. Even not for just transgender, for any surgery you take.
Right.
You should be able to call back 724. Yeah. There's bleeding or anything, you should get feedback right away. Yeah. And the second thing is just like, I can kind of put myself in her shoes. That is like, let's say if you call after giving birth to a baby, they didn't call you back. What do you do next? You just file a complaint. You just call somebody else right away. Just like, this is ridiculous. But for them, it's kind of like, well, probably this is on me. Yeah. Let's wait. Second day, third day, until 2 weeks, well, I either do it or I may die. That's the moment you start to push very carefully. Need to actually pick your word carefully. I can almost picture myself doing that. pick your words carefully. Listen to the attitude in the phone about the other person. Is she actually trying to treat me? Is he trying to treat me? Or actually he's totally impatient, think I'm ridiculous.
Right.
Going through all these kind of things to actually go there to just get some basic needs addressed.
Yes.
Yeah, I can totally picture that in my mind, and that's terrible.
It is terrible. And, there's this feeling of not being worthy. There's this feeling of low self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Because many of the people I talk to have been literally beat up by society, emotionally and physically. I've talked to people who've been beat up in bathrooms. I've been talked to people who have stopped at rest areas and they're in the middle of transitioning and needing to go to the bathroom or just needing to get out and stretch their legs, and been mistreated. And then it's like, well, who do you go to? Okay, you go to the police, and then you're putting yourself out there.
Mm-hmm.
They just really just want to be accepted, but yet they're living in an unaccepting society, and that's why I wanted to read that. I call it a poem, but it's actually it's a short story, but I think of it as a poem because it's just the flow, I suppose. There's a very high suicide rate with this population. As a matter of fact, suicide is the highest indicator of mortality for these people. And we can only speculate because there's probably people that have committed suicide that we didn't even know were struggling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like, when I was working in healthcare and I would ask people, I could ask about their drinking. How many beers do you drink? Because I would know they were drinking beers that would be in there. Oh, 2 a day. Okay, 6. It's the same thing with what we consider mental illness. People, there's a shame attached to it, just like with many things. And so people don't want to disclose that they're having depression. They don't want to disclose that they're not doing okay, especially once they transition. Once they transition, they think that everything's going to be okay. But what they don't realize, and this is what they've told me, is that it is a process. And even though a lot of the distress goes away, then they inherit new problems. The society, like maybe they were accepted as female and their coworkers and all that, but they were very unhappy inside. And, they would go to their family functions and be around their nieces and nephews and whatnot. They were very unhappy inside. Once they transition, they finally have that happiness of having the body and having the identity that they believe they are. But then, so they have self-acceptance for once. But then they don't have society's acceptance. And they might be denied going to Christmas and Thanksgiving because their family members don't want to confuse the nieces and nephews or their siblings even, depending on how old they are when they transition. And then, of course, if they're going through a divorce, then they lose a whole other family. And many times, then their families, depending on the families, might choose to make this a war and whose side are we on. So this person is just pushed out, literally into the cold.
It's really sad for me to hear that actually the court take this as a factor to decide who gets to see the kids and who gets the house and everything, simply because you're a transgender. It's almost like you're cheating, or even worse than that, right? It's just like it's a factor to determine whose fault is bigger in this divorce.
Well, yes, we think about that because it was considered a mental illness up until recently.
Yeah.
So you're not going to give the children to somebody who's considered mentally unstable. But then also the children, if they're like yelling and screaming that they don't want to be with that parent because the whole family is saying to the children, oh, this is a horrible thing. Look what your parent or your parent just did. Then the children would get confused. And then also then you have to think about the children's friends. What peer pressure is huge. Making fun of that parent. Well, that child might not want to live or even be dropped off from school or have that parent come to events because of how then that child will be treated by approximation. And that's what the spouses think as well. Well, I don't want to be with this person anymore because then how am I going to be treated? Or maybe I could lose my job. Something to consider is currently 15 states offer no specific legal protections for the LGBT populations, and another 21 states only offer partial protections. So people can lose housing. they can lose their jobs just because they identify as transgender. And so a lot of people don't realize this, that it's people who identify as transgender. It's just not like, oh, I think I'm going to do this. I mean, there's a huge potential loss. So
are they aware of that before they actually make the transition?
Many,
that's like very good information to share with the audience.
Well, many are, but that's one of the things I write about too, because I want them to have that informed decision making, that because potentially maybe they are living in a state, but maybe they might want to one day move to a different state for whatever reason that is. They need to understand that different states have different rules and regulations. I mean, most of us know that, but some people might not. It's just important for people when they decide to do something to have all the facts.
Another thing is
Truly.
Just like I put myself in their shoes. It's almost like there is a hope that is like, okay, I have been studying this thing for 15 years, 20 years, until one day I make a decision. I want to do the surgery. After that, everything is going to be fine. It's going to be better. But it turns out, according to your description, that is actually no. You solve one problem with self-construction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're fine with yourself now. But now everybody else is against you, because before, your family is still kind of okay, you're a male, and you show up as a cousin, you show up as like an uncle, you show up as like a nephew. And suddenly, everybody needs to see you from a new gender, because now there's no way to hide it.
Right.
So, is it fair to say, like, actually making the transition, aside from the individual side, the society actually put a harder pressure on you after the conversion than before?
So, like, more, I want to make sure I understand your question. So, is there more pressure after they transition?
Mm-hmm. From a social perspective instead of like individual, because they do have the self.
Absolutely. So
it's more, right, after conversion.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. They might lose their physician that they've had since they were a baby. What we have found is that quality of life improves in some ways as far as internally. Mm-hmm. They actually did a systematic review with 28 studies and 1,833 people who identify as transgender and who underwent the gender reassignment. That's what it's called. Okay, it's switched names over the years, but gender reassignment. It's not sex reassignment. It's gender reassignment.
Hold on. So when you say the reassignment, does it always involve a surgery, or does it also involve, like, I just say, hey, from now I'm gonna just not removing my parts?
Okay. So gender reassignment is when they actually have the surgery.
Okay.
That involves a surgery. Okay. So people who don't have the surgery, and you have to be really careful about terminology. Okay. So you don't want to use the word like hermaphrodite or even like cross-dresser. People that wear other people's clothes, like the gender that other people's, I shouldn't say that. I mean, no, they're wearing their own clothes. They're going out and buying clothes of the gender of which they were not born, but of which they identify. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for a variety of reasons, they might not be able to have the surgery. I mean, let's just say, for example, somebody really wants to have the surgery, okay? But let's just say they were born of childhood diabetes. They're not going to have a good outcome if they have the bottom surgery, okay? I mean, they have to be careful what surgeries they pick and choose. There's a lot of different reasons why they can't. But that doesn't mean that they're any less a person who identifies as transgender than anybody else, whether they have the surgery or not. Now, I have spoken to some people who've had the surgery, and, I had to say, now, come on, well, I've had the surgery, so people that haven't are, and I'm like, look, you can't, you know what? Your population right now is marginalized enough without you further chopping it up. Mm-hmm. Like, let's just, let's all be kind to each other, and not just people who identify as transgender, but people who identify as cisgender and people who identify as, as non-binary or lesbian or whatever word they want to call themselves. I mean, why do we even have to have these labels? That's what I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is born some way and truly identifies as something else and is not going to be happy and enjoy their life, which here it says 80% of individuals reported improvement of gender dysphoria. So it's the improvement of the gender dysphoria, which is this conflict inside of them that just feels like I'm just not in the right body. Now, that doesn't mean that 80% are suddenly happy, because then they got to go out and deal with all this stuff in society.
Mm-hmm.
But the 80% felt better about themselves. Now, that really speaks to something. That means that this is not just a passing thing. This is something that is real. I mean, if 80% report that they feel better, so 78% reported improvement of psychological symptoms, okay? I mean, there's a lot of depression because, like I said, and when I give this presentation in Portland, I keep talking about suicide. Oh, and did I mention suicide? And oh, by the way, there's suicide. And oh, did I mention suicide? Imagine going through your life and feeling like you're this fraud. You're just pretending to be a man. You're just pretending. Inside, you really, really, really feel like you want to be a girl. Mm-hmm. And you want to be able to express what that means to you. And I don't necessarily mean lace or pink. I mean just what that means to you. I mean, look at the way I'm dressed today. This is how I present. If somebody told me that I had to dress in a different way or wear my hair a different way or not because I enjoy makeup, I couldn't do this. I couldn't come to work like this. You know, I can't imagine how that would make me feel.
And it's not a temporary thing.
No. I mean, we all know, like any of us that have gone to private school, even just being told what you had to wear, right? Like that genetic cookie cutter. That's how they feel.
But it's still okay because after 3 years, school is over. Now you can be yourself. But for this one, it's just like, where is
goes
the end?
on and on and on. And then they might be in a marriage where they know that that person is not going to be accepting of them because maybe they were raised in a certain religion. So then they married a girl or a boy from that religion. And that religion doesn't accept how they feel. So they feel like an imposter. They feel like they're just going through the motions. So then they become very secretive. And they become very good at secrets. And then they feel, I mean, how does anybody feel? Let me ask you this. We are taught to not lie. We are taught to not betray. We are taught to not be secretive with those that trust and love us. So imagine living that 24/7 for years. What would that do to you?
Exactly. Like I have a conflict of mind, and if it's just one secret, one little tiny secret which is not important, fine. But if it's a secret, every time I'm conscious, I realize it. 7/24.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, and that's why I say like the conversion seems like almost like my only hope. That is like, okay, one day I have been doing this for 30 years, 25 years. I found a solution. I know the solution is hard. I'm hoping that's the solution. And once I get the conversion through the process, I got the surgery. I got all the issues they're facing with healthcare, insurance. After that, all my family, friends, all my co-workers, my employers treat me differently. It's almost like a dilemma to me. It's just like one way, it's a dead end. The other way, it's a dead end. Then suicide seems like the only feasible option, right?
Right. Suicide rates are so high, especially in the adolescents. I mean, they're going through all their hormones anyways, and their bodies are changing, and they're like horrified, like this is not what I want. Mm-hmm. And then they're maybe talking to their parents about it, and their parents are like, well, you can't do this. And then they've got the pressure of high school and grades, and then of course the pressure of dating.
Yep.
Couple of my participants have transitioned, and one of them in particular, actually a couple of them, but one of them in particular says, I've always loved women, and I identify as a woman, and now that I've transitioned, I don't want to be with guys. I don't see myself as a girly girl. I see myself as a sporty girl, and I love women, but this is the problem. The women I'm attracted to aren't attracted to me because I see myself as a sporty girl, and lesbians don't want me because I am honest and I tell them what I used to be and how I was born. And also, she says I transitioned later, so it's obvious because I've had lots of testosterone, so I do have some features I can't get rid of, is what she's told me, which when I'm looking at her, I'm like, I'm not going to lie. Mm-hmm. I don't ever lie to my participants. I'm like, don't ask me questions unless you want to hear it, because I'm not going to lie to you. Because oh, you look great. That's the worst thing you can tell them if they know that they don't look so great, or if they're not passing. Do you think I'm passing? I'm going to say no. I'm just telling you. Mm-hmm. But I'll still walk down the mall with you, and I'll still go out to dinner with you, mm-hmm. and I don't care if people look at us and have those question marks or whatever. But because it's none of their business. But she is very attracted to girly girls. Okay. So girly girls are girls that like to wear, dresses and perfume and makeup and all that kind of good stuff. I would consider myself a girly girl. I'm actually, this is pretty sporty for me. I usually wear, dresses and a lot of makeup, and I just love all that stuff. And the nails and all that stuff. I mean, I can't help it. If somebody told me I couldn't do that anymore, I'd be like, So she's attracted to girly girls, but versus the sporty girls. And so think about this. So she's attracted. So she's middle-aged. So then you have, okay, that cuts off some of the dating spectrum. Mm-hmm. Okay, not attracted to men. So that's half the population. Not attracted to sporty girls. That's the population. The lesbians that she's approached don't want anything to do with her. And the girly girls, most times are attracted to men. Mm-hmm. So what I've found in talking with people is not only they have to deal with the stigma and the fear of losing jobs and the fear of losing housing and all the other fears they have and the fears of being beat up and the bathroom issues and everything else, they're lonely.
And plus family, brothers, and all kinds of issues, actually. This is something like, it's really hard for the family to take it. They need to adjust to that.
And a lot of people don't really, I'm hoping to get that awareness out there, but like, one of the things that one of the participants told me that really stuck with me was, she said, after I transitioned, somebody came up to me and said, oh, you're so brave. And she was like, that's supposed to make me feel better? Like, she didn't say that to the person, but like, I'm not feeling very courageous right now. I'm not feeling brave. I'm just being authentic. It'd be like you being yourself and somebody walking up and saying, oh, you're so brave for being yourself. How's that supposed to make you feel? It doesn't make you feel validated. And then walks off. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, by the way, I just put that on you. Now I got to kind of think about that. And then walks away, and it's not like, I want to be your friend. I'm going to be with you. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're so brave. And then scurries off.
That actually goes to one of the original questions I want to ask you is actually, so we say this kind of things, like you're so brave, right? Or some things, but clearly when the people who has been through the transition, actually they don't take that thing as a compliment, or even nothing hurts them. Yeah. Can you give us several examples on this type of message we're delivering? We think we're trying to be nice, but actually no, you're hurting people. Can you give us several examples like that?
Yeah. For example, mm-hmm. All right. So I have met several people who knew people before they transitioned. And they would tell me their dead name, and the dead name is the name they were born with. It's like, I don't need to hear that. Okay? And then if that gets back to them, then that's hurtful to them because they don't identify with that name, and they don't want that name out there. Okay? Also, just being patronizing, like saying, that's very patronizing to say, oh, you're so brave. The best thing that you can do for someone who is transitioning or thinking of transitioning or has transitioned is to just treat them the same. Just treat them the same and ask them what they want to be called. What are their pronouns? Because some people who are transitioning might want to be called they or them and not he or her, or they might want to they might have other pronouns that they want to be called. Imagine if you wanted to be called your name and somebody kept calling you Charles. Oh, sorry, Charles. Oh, I keep saying that. I mean, that's not funny. After a while, it becomes kind of like it's disrespectful. People want to be called the name that they identify with, and anything less is disrespectful, and that includes the pronouns. Now, in my classes, I teach graduate students. We go around the room, and I ask people what they want to be called and their pronouns. They might want to go by their middle name. There might be 2 or 3 people in the class that have the same name, and they want to be called their nickname. I respect that. I also tell them what I want to be called, which is Dr. V. I don't want them to have to mess with trying to get my last name, because I don't like when my last name is mispronounced, because it's been mispronounced since kindergarten. So, and my students, I prefer they don't call me by my first name, because, now when we sit in my office, if they're my advisees, then we can go to a first name casual basis, because I really want them to feel comfortable. But out in the hallway, that's my expectation, is that they call me Dr. V.
Interesting. Because when I got a student saying I'm Catherine, but I go with Kate.
Yeah.
I think that's no problem. I'm just to call you Kate right now.
Right.
But then if I go back to the pronouns and go back to the the name before transition, after the transition, that thing doesn't cross my mind if you don't mention.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, too, is I always make sure that my students know that I have an office that's a safe zone. And, they might not want to be called by that name or by that pronoun off campus. Because if their family is in the area and the family doesn't know yet, because as you remember, this population, they're used to, unless they've had lots of support growing up, which, there are more cases of that now, but in the past, no. The secrets, keeping things a secret, because they're not ready to disclose yet. And when they decide to disclose, if they ever do, that's completely on them. They should never be called out in public, ever. That's and it might be oops, sorry, that's my bad. But no, that could be actually extremely detrimental to them in so many ways. For their families. Imagine this. Imagine somebody transitioning. I had one of my participants actually, unfortunately, lost her mother and had to fly to a southern state for the funeral, if you could imagine, which I have no trouble with the southern states. I went to school in Kentucky for a while. It was lovely, but
Alabama.
There you go. All right. Yeah. But Auburn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I read up on you.
Oh, so people did read, huh?
I do. Yeah. I wanted to know who I was talking to. But the problem was then how did the family introduce her in the funeral? Because there's, you got the lineup, and it was a formal funeral. So she, he, daughter, son, aunt, all of a sudden, she was no longer her mother's and father's son, her brother's brother, and there were all these people there, and she had gone to church there for a number of years, and off and on, then afterwards visiting, and also had attended there with her wife before the transition. So imagine how confusing that was, because people were saying things like, well, isn't your son going to come here? And then, of course, she was sitting in the back, and then, of course, then she was invited to sit in the front. But, I mean, it was just awkward. And then, of course, there's all that, are you sure you want to do this? Don't you want to transition back? Is this working for you? Are you really happy? All that pressure from the family. So it's even though that gender dysphoria goes away because they are finally able to embrace the identity that they believe they should have been born, they are finally there, that 80%. It's constant then. It's bang, bang. So it used to be that war was inside of them and society was accepting. Then it switches to where that war is gone for 80%. But then you've got the new war.
And you got it from the people you love, and they say that same thing they care about you. They always think like maybe you just make the wrong decision. But for me, if I put myself in that decision, it's like, seriously, this surgery, you think I just do it for fun or just out of some random thoughts? Do you know how long that process is, how harmful that thing is? So don't you think I thought it through before and I'm not obligated to explain any of that to you guys.
Right.
If you don't understand, so be it. Right?
So imagine that. Imagine explaining yourself.
Every time.
Yeah, I mean, how exhausting that would be to your family members, to your coworkers, and then feeling, many times they tell me, feeling like they have to constantly apologize for that. You know, I mean, it's just exhausting. Yeah. It's exhausting, and the loneliness. You know, so I am presenting to the International Academy of Rehab Professionals, but in particular life care planners. Life care planners in the past might have been working with people who identify as transgender, but probably didn't know. Because in talking with a lot of people who are life care planners and have done it for years, they really haven't focused on this. Now, life care planners, what they do is for example, somebody has a congenital problem, like they're born with something, you know, spina bifida or something, or they have a horrific car accident. The life care planner actually works with the physician and the insurance companies and projects how much money the person will need for their lifetime. They do like a lifetime projection, but also looking at equipment and physician services and medications. I mean, everything. They do a complete breakdown of so many different things, including like if they're going to need to go to the gym and work out, and, you know, they look at like everything. So I actually did a breakdown I did a part 1 and a part 2. I did male to female, and then I did female to male, looking at hormones and modalities and physicians and different things for the life care planner. So I'm going to be bringing posters and presenting that. My point is that this is relatively new area of healthcare. People who identify as transgender have always been with us. It's just that they're now coming to the forefront. It's becoming more accepting in society because now we have Generation Z and the millennials. But, I mean, Generation Z is more like every generation has different personalities. And Generation Z is just more like about, you know, that's fine and take care of myself and don't worry about that, you know. So it's becoming more accepted. But then we still have the political climate and your individual views on things. And then you've got also your religious sector. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm Greek Orthodox, so I'm not saying that religion is bad because, I mean, my religion, which is close to like the Roman Catholic, would not be accepting of this necessarily. And also in my religion, I mean, men and women get married, and you marry once for life. And they do not like the divorce, and if you divorce, then you can't get remarried in the church. I mean, it takes a true act of like so many different things. If you would get married twice in the church, it doesn't happen. You know, and so there's many different things that will never change, is what I'm saying. Generations can go on, but then there's the politics, and there's the religion, and so many different things, and also traveling around the world. I mean, we can say, well, this generation is changing and these are happening, but then you have to think about the different countries. I mean, imagine identifying as transgender. One of them told me that she was flying to a different country, and the TSA person had her take off her wig because she actually was having hair transplants because she had the male pattern baldness going on. And so she was in the middle of having all these hair transplants. And so she's wearing a wig. And they made her, if you can imagine having somebody tell you to take off your wig, and of course then that makes the person look more like the gender in which they were born, even though they're wearing makeup, because the wig's gone and they're bald. Okay? And so then they get taken into a room and they get frisked down, because they're like, well, we think that maybe you're trying to hide something or whatever. It's just the humiliation of just constantly being targeted and worried about being targeted, and then feeling like, well, if I go to a country that maybe doesn't have the protection I feel like I'm used to in the United States, maybe. Some of the countries that, have maybe some, civil wars going on and whatnot, that are a little dangerous, maybe. Just feeling like the places that they could have gone before all this, maybe they don't have access to. Even if they don't want to go to those places, just knowing that they can't.
Yeah.
Because of the way maybe they were treated by TSA, even within the United States. And I'm not picking on TSA. I'm just saying they're doing a good job because of all the stuff that's happened. But now that they're having to be, more attentive, that's when now we're having like the wanding and the wigs coming off and the patting down and things of that nature. I mean, I know that I, up until recently, wore these 2 very heavy gold, and they were solid gold bracelets, but I took them off because I was having, I had a CAT scan, okay? And also I want to have my knee surgery, so I had to take all that stuff off. But whenever I would travel, I would set everything off, and that was before you did the moose thing where you would, would you go through, I would always set off everything, and I would always have to get patted down, and sometimes they would go up into my crotch, the girls would, and I don't care. But I mean, imagine if you are transitioning and you have not had your bottom surgery yet, and you set off the machine and they say, well, do you want a male or do you want a female agent? And do you want to go alone into a room? Well, if you were transitioning from male to female, you're not going to say, I want a male agent. You're going to say, I want a female agent. Well, the female agents, a lot of times will go right up because I mean, it's just, there's nothing there, right? I mean, they're going to go all the way up when they check you, especially if you're wearing pants. I mean, it's just like right there. Especially if you've set off the machine, and some of those machines will show like different things, like a seam will show that you've got something somewhere. But let's just say you haven't had the surgery yet, but you're in the process of it. You're taking your hormones, and you've got you're doing your hair transplants, and you've had a little bit of plastic surgery on your face to feminize it. So there's that kind of question mark. You're looking a little androgynous. You ask for a female, and they check you out, and they say, what's in your pockets? And it's not something in your pockets. It's actually your male parts that you were born with, that you're planning on having the surgery, and you're not going to have that. How do you explain that? And then you're explaining that. Like, well, I'm just, I mean, really, should you have to?
Yeah.
It's constant embarrassment, constant secrets, constant, like, feeling like they have to apologize. I mean.
Yeah, I kind of relate to that. And also back to the, go back to home and going to the funeral thing. It's just like, okay, seems like if I were in this, actually one possibility is just I go somewhere, nobody knows my history after the conversion, and just say, hey, I start anew as a new person. But then eventually you're connected to the, one way or the other, you're connected back, and you still need to handle this. And remember, that's where you grow up. So one way or the other, all the people who are closest to you was back there. So eventually you need to handle that. Even hiding from them is not a permanent solution. So it kind of reminds me, have you watched Friends?
Yeah.
Chandler's father was a transgender, right? And you can kind of see, like, in that show, how they basically make him look like a joke.
Yeah.
And he lives in Las Vegas. And where are you going to live if you're transgender? Las Vegas, of course.
Of course they're going to choose a place like Las Vegas. Now, this is the thing that I talk to my students about as far as sensitivity goes, and we talk about stigma with people that are overweight, and stigma with ageism, stigma with just so many different things, and how, our media will make fun of people that are old or fat. I shouldn't use that word fat, but this is a person of size. So excuse me if I offend anybody when I say that, but I was just actually trying to be harsh because that's how it comes across. And then, of course, now we've got people who identify as transgender. Let's just make fun of them and stick them in Las Vegas. It's just, what it does is now that this particular population is come to more to the forefront, so now it's like, yeah, there's still that stigma. Yeah, they're marginalized, and now we can make fun of them. Now we can actually put them on TV because now people won't say, oh, what does that mean? Because people know, or they think they know. And so it's just one more variable for our entertainment. And the other thing too is now that this has come more to the forefront, this is what my participants have said. I used to be able to sort of blend in, even though I didn't feel like I was passing. But now I feel like people are out looking like, is that a man? Is that a woman? Like people are out now looking to see if somebody, is transgender.
Suddenly you feel like a foreigner in a different country.
Yes. Well,
they see you look different, or
yeah, looking for changes. Or looking to see if they can spot somebody who, is transgender. I just, and I've actually, spent a lot of time with, like in different states, with my participants and gone out and had dinner and lunch and shopping and things like that, because I just really wanted to see what that experience was like, for them. And I would look to see, because they would say, I want you to look at people's reactions to me, and it's hard not to get a little irritated, but at the same time, I know that people are just people and people are curious. But I feel like the more research is done on it and the more of the truth that comes out, and that this is not like a choice. I have a choice in this. I can be this or I can be this. No, it's like people who identify as transgender really feel like they don't have a choice, okay? If that word can get out and that people can just understand, and it needs to be not a big deal.
Is it fair to say they're in a worse situation than homosexual people? Because we're kind of like more and more towards, like, I understand what gay and a lesbian is, but transgender is almost like the gay and the lesbians 20 years ago.
Yes, I would have to say that, and I've actually been out and had dinner and had these conversations with people who, identify as lesbian, homosexual, transgender. And yeah, I mean, it used to be the same thing. People would get beat up. People would get, strung up and drugged behind cars. I mean, those things really happened. And they've happened to different nationalities as well, and to, different, just various groups of people. I mean, we see that happening now with, there's all these hate crimes against people that identify as transgender, people who are Muslim, just because.
Labels.
Yeah, just go after people, So yeah, right now, this is something where it's like the conversion therapy used to go for homosexuals. Well, if we just put you through the conversion therapy, then you won't be attracted to a man anymore or a woman anymore, and they're made to feel bad about having those feelings. Same with the people who are transgender.
So you have been working with transgender people for more than decades now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the situation getting better, just as for their social situation and their individual situation and medical care, or is it getting worse?
It's getting worse.
It's getting worse.
I think it's getting better and it's getting worse. Things have to get worse before they get better. Because now the population is more like in a spotlight, that does not necessarily make it better. But
so you went from hiding to right in the middle of the conversation, right?
Either hiding or just trying to be discreet, or just kind of slowly transitioning in the background and trying to pass, right? But my feeling, I guess, when I've talked to some people who are transgender, it's not so much they want to pass anymore. They just want to be accepted, and it's not like, in fact, one of them just told me recently, I don't know why I thought I could become a girl, because I'm not really a girl, but this is who I am. And that really struck with me, because it's like, you know what? Yeah, this is who you are, and this is okay. And it shouldn't matter if I think it's okay. It just is. It just is what it is.
It's existential, yeah.
And don't you think we should all look at each other like we're on a continuum? We're all on a continuum and a trajectory for personal growth, for personal happiness. And why can't we be on a trajectory and a continuum for gender? Because if you truly talk to somebody who understands genetics, there's the X and there's the Y, but there's so much stuff in between. And who am I to say that I am any more female or less female than somebody else? And even if I could say that, why would it matter?
Mm-hmm.
What matters is that we all feel validated and that we all have a place in society. And we can't just say, just because I don't believe that this person's doing this, that I can stick them over here. I mean, we got to be really careful that we don't go back to, the concentration camps, because I can remember in this country at one time, my father talking about this, because he was from the East Coast and he was old enough to talk about this, how they had rounded up a lot of the people that were Japanese Americans and they had stuck them in camps.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, come on. I mean, when does it stop? Why can't we learn lessons from what has happened before? I mean, really, does it really help to marginalize people? Does it really help to just, have compartments of all these? I mean, why can't we just say, you know what? It really is on a continuum. And I think that's probably what we're going to find. We're going to find that it is biological, okay? Or not something that is, perpetuated in the household.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are probably people that are born into households that are very inclusive and allow for that exploration, and they might say, oh, I feel like a boy today and I feel like a girl today. But truly, by the time they hit puberty, they will have figured it out, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the people I've spoken to have said that, when they were like age 3 and 4, they knew,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And it didn't go away. But there might be groups of people that are more inclusive and just say, hey, let's do some experimentation, and I just feel like I'm going to try this hat on for size.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's not truly somebody who identifies as transgender. Everybody I've talked to says they know. There's no question. They just know. And it doesn't go away.
It's just the same way that I know I'm male, right? It's not like I suddenly have a mental picture that I'm male. It's just like I was male.
Right.
All the time I was male.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not like, going to school where you keep changing your major
Mm-hmm.
because you're not sure about that. You're not sure what you want to be when you grow up. I mean, this is something that is really, really deep-seated. And, and how dare we as a society say, I can make all these decisions for myself. I have all this freedom. This is America, but you can't.
Sadly, that's what's happening right now with a lot of groups, I think.
Yeah.
Not just for transgender.
Right.
Which kind of worried me a little bit. Yeah, back to the thing you were talking about is just there is a lot of information there, but are they scientific research information? Are they correct data, or actually they're just noise data? And there are some information you get from transgender from TV shows. There are some information you get from the journalist. I don't know if they know what they're doing or not, through which kind of reason, political or whatever reason, to try to, make the bathroom thing a big deal. Because, the first thing came to me when I think about transgender was the bathroom issue. Why? Because President Obama basically commented on that and make it a huge deal. And then if I go back and think about it, turns out, according to your description, that's actually not an urgent need even for them. So it's really great you're doing this kind of, if for me to think about it, even like a lot of people who protested for transgender people are not even transgender people, or they don't even understand what transgender is. They're just protesting for, almost like, I don't know, just protesting for protesting. I kind of feel that way.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, yeah.
I think it's a protesting because of a misunderstanding. Like, oh, I don't want my little girl to go into a bathroom and have a man in there. I mean, that's what I hear. And then my response to that is, if somebody has to go to the bathroom and they are presenting as female, where are they supposed to go? And why do we keep talking about this bathroom thing? People go in and they come out. The bathroom is not the issue.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is equal rights.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, when we talk about equal rights, we're not talking about bathrooms.
Job, housing,
Yeah.
health care.
Let's talk
legal
about what's really
protection.
important. Let's talk about equal rights. Let's talk about basic equal rights. Being able to marry who you want to marry. Being able to, apply for housing and not have them looking at all this stuff behind you. I mean, if you can qualify, then you get the house, a job. Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why should it be any different? Basic human rights and equal pay, whether you're male or female. So why should somebody who transitions from male to female suddenly make less money? Because if you look at basic human rights, men get paid more than women. So sometimes I've said to some of the people that have transitioned, I said, well, now that you're in my room, you are, not going to get the same rights that you got as a, let's just say that they're Caucasian. So you are a white male, now you're in my room. So be prepared. There's no equal rights. And even though we say, oh, we've come so far with the women have the right to vote and all that, we're not there yet. So then go ahead and couple that with now having the moniker, as Kai had said, about, the T word, as we call it. I actually wrote something called Sticks and Stones may break my bones, but words can absolutely harm me, the T word. Mm-hmm. That was a springboard for after.
What would be a appropriate way to say other than the T word?
Just their name.
Just their name.
Like, okay, for example, people don't refer to me as, when they see me, mm-hmm. they see me as Ingrid, mom, mm-hmm. Dr. V, mm-hmm. Friend, peer. They don't see me as, my gender. Mm-hmm. Or as my descriptor. I mean, that's not what comes to mind. But why is it that when we see somebody or we know somebody who is transgender, we become like this, just like that's all we can see, mm-hmm. is that word, that label. Mm-hmm. It's because it's new to us and because it's interesting and because people are curious. They're curious in a way that maybe isn't so healthy, or they're curious in a healthy way. But why can't people just be people? Mm-hmm. See? Because when I look at you, I don't think man, I think, wow, this is really fun, and you're, a professor here, and we're working together, and I don't start thinking about gender labels.
Makes sense. Same thing with race.
Yeah.
Same thing with that. But, yeah.
Gender blind. We have to be gender blind.
Identity politics I kind of feel like it's pushing actually more and more towards the other way. Yeah, in what's going on right now, it's just like people are trying to put labels on different groups, not just like transgender, right? Race, immigrants, all these kind of things.
Yes, you see, that's a great way to look at it. Okay, mm-hmm. Okay, we're building the walls and we're labeling people, and these are good people and these are bad people, and let's just put everybody in boxes so we can label the good and the bad.
You are looking for a simplified description, stereotype. You're looking for a simplified solution then. And also, if you know a little bit about statistics, you're basically saying, hey, there's no within group variance, but everything is just between group, which is totally ridiculous from any kind of data point. It's just right? Think about all the different people with the same race. That's way bigger difference than people from different race.
Yeah.
Right? But, yeah. That's why I say what you're doing is really great, because I kind of feel like if you go to news, you go to propaganda, and you go to, I think the whole, I don't know, the society is actually pushing the other way around, which I think is very dangerous.
Yes, it is very dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's a good word for it. It's dangerous. It's dangerous on so many different levels. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's harmful to society, but it's also harmful to individuals. And when does it stop? And and truly, I said this before, when are we going to learn from our past mistakes? I mean, really. I mean, we've already been down this road so many different times in so many different ways.
With different groups.
Others
take turn to be shot at.
It seems like it's like let's take turns. So, my hope is to many times a way that a situation can be diffused. And I've learned this by working in hospitals, working with patients. A way to diffuse a situation is to demystify it, mm-hmm. but also to give the facts. And I don't have all the facts. I've learned that many of my population will go on Facebook to get their facts, because many times the facts weren't out there. Now the Williams Institute is a great resource, and I look at them. The Williams Institute, does great research on this population and various populations. And then there's also the International Journal of Transgenderism, which they meet like every other year, and they have speakers and whatnot. So that's a good resource as well. But there needs to be more resources out there, and this is what they've told me, on the qualitative. Because the Facebook, as we both know, it's people's feelings, but also it might not necessarily be true. Mm-hmm. You have to be careful of the catfish, people saying things that are not true. But also, if somebody goes through this entire process and they've spent a lot of money and they've had a lot of loss, they might not be necessarily as honest in public mm-hmm. about maybe some of the things that aren't working so well for them.
So far, with all we have, what will be several good resources if I may have this concern about if I were transgender, for example? I'm struggling with, should I do the conversion? Should I not do the conversion? What should be my life care planning? Like, do you have any good suggestions? Where to look for resources? And also, let's go with resource first. And then I want to ask you actually to elaborate on some advices for people, especially at a young age. And a very critical advice will be like, should you do conversion as soon as possible? Should you wait? How do you even decide, right? But let's go with the resource first.
Well, okay, so the Williams Institute is a great resource, and also your peer-reviewed journals are out there where you can just, be reading that material. Of course, then you have to think about, what level the person is. Like, exactly, let's just say that if they're, not necessarily comfortable reading scholarly works and reading tables and whatnot, that might not be the best place for them. There are actually support groups that meet in safe places where people can go. And then, I belong to two of them. One of them is in Phoenix, and it's called Transspectrum, and it meets twice a month. But many of your larger cities have groups, and then you can you can look it up now. It used to be it was just word of mouth.
Is it safe to start a group like this in a rural area?
They're not in rural areas as much, but also if a person...
Or not the city rural area, just like not big city, but the city of the size of La Crosse.
There's actually a place here which is for people who are, LGBTQ, okay. But also, it's a place where you can go and feel safe and talk and ask questions, and then, say, for example, my particular need is this, and then you could say, and then ask for help. So sitting in those groups, I've heard, is good and not good. So sitting in the groups can be good because you can see people who are in various stages of transition if the group is big enough, like in some of the bigger cities, like in Portland and in Denver and in like Phoenix, places like that. But what you'll find, though, is people will tend to not go to those groups as readily many times once they get to a certain level, because they don't need the group anymore. It's like going to any support group. Mm-hmm. If you don't need the support, you're not going to go. But also once they feel like in their minds they are where they are in their transition, they might not go. So for somebody who really wants to see the beginning and the end, to talk to somebody who's completely transitioned about, are you still having struggles, which yep. Yes, they will, they're not there to talk to. They're going to be seeing people who are really struggling just as much as they are. So it might not necessarily be always, the end all, mm-hmm. But it's a good place to start. But then, of course, the journals. Now, my family is a family of physicians. So my sister is an ear, nose, and throat, and she's also a plastic surgeon. So, my father was a physician, and my son's going to medical school. The reason I'm saying this is that I feel like I can say candidly that going to talk to a plastic surgeon is not going to get you the answers necessarily that you want. You have to think about it. It's like if you bring your car to a mechanic, there's ethical mechanics and there's non-ethical mechanics. And there's unethical mechanics who have house payments and ex-wives and ex-husbands to support, or children that are in very expensive schools. So let's just say you go to see a plastic surgeon because you want to have the facial feminization and you're desperate. You know, they're going to tell you, hey, I can make you look like this. And then what I've heard again and again and again is my expectations weren't met.
Because the surgery is...
The surgeries are many times like, oh, you're going to have female orgasms. Oh, you're going to look like, you know, you'll pass. You know, I've had several people say, as a guy, I had these explosive orgasms because, you know, the male and the female experience is different. I can't speak for the male experience because I'm a female. But I know that the clitoris is a very small but very highly dense nerve area, whereas the penis, you know, you've got the glands and everything else, and it's the ejaculation is, you know, what you're feeling. So if you do the inversion of the penis and then you make a clitoris, how are you going to make that full of nerves, for one thing? And also you're making the male anatomy, the female, there's the male parts like the prostate are still going to be there. You're still going to have some of your male parts. So what I've found is that they've told me that their actual release is, if they come from the front through their neo-vagina, it's actually the rubbing of the prostate, which gives them that feeling of a release. It's actually not a female release, it's a rubbing of the prostate. The problem is the more estrogen you take and the more inhibitors you take, the smaller your prostate gets, so before you know it, you're not having those releases either. They're getting harder and harder to have. Now, the physicians are getting better and better at making these
statement?
Of creating the neo-vaginas and all these different things, but, you know, mainly it's for the aesthetics. You know, I mean, the female anatomy has the tissues are different and things like that, and also, I mean, it's not a closed unit necessarily. We go from our vagina to our cervix to our uterus. I mean, it's, you know.
So if you talk to a plastic surgery person, and maybe they will give you information, but basically just, you know, do your own research and try to see what's going on, at least, right?
Yeah, and also, you know, like I said, I have spoken to several people who've had the surgeries, and I've asked them about orgasms. Like, what were you told? What could you expect? And they're like, well, I'm not really worried about that. What I'm worried about is that I tend to be dribbling urine now, or I can't hold it, or I have stress incontinence, or all this other kind of stuff, or I have these weird odors that I didn't have before, and I feel self-conscious, and nobody told me that I needed how I needed to take care of this on a regular basis, because I mean, it wasn't like I had a mom to ask, and I was a little girl, and I was like, you know.
Yeah.
So
and back to the issue you raised was like, if you want to do a follow-up question, actually it's hard. So
well, and the plastic surgeon, I mean, they're going to be like, well, I just did the surgery, and what you need to do is just keep the area clean. Well, what does that mean?
You need nurse, you need all these kind of things, just as when you have a baby, right? All this kind of information.
Or just go to a GYN. But then, you know, it's like maybe they're not told to do that. Or maybe it's not on their radar because maybe they've never done that before. Probably not. But the problem, though, then, is they go to a GYN, and think about that. You're sitting in that room, you're transitioning, and they look up your chart, and your chart says your male name and your female name.
Oh, they show both at the same time?
Of course they do.
Okay.
Just like with our technology, just like if you go and you rent a car, both names are going to come up. I mean, you're never, even if you go back and you change your birth certificate all the way back, it's still, that name's always going to pop up. I mean, always. You can change everything all the way back, and it's there. I mean, it's always going to be linked. So then you're sitting in the waiting room, and once you get in to see the doctor, even if people aren't calling you by the wrong name or the wrong pronouns or whatever, then you go in there, probably need to disclose that you have a prostate because maybe your dad has a history of prostate cancer.
I see. Oh, okay.
Right. And then you're up there in the stirrups having your neo-vagina looked at, and next thing you realize there might be 3 or 4 people in there. And why do you need 3 or 4 people in there? Oh, it's because they're curious. I've actually witnessed this. I actually went in with one of my participants, and I actually said, I don't really know why there needs to be more than the doctor and the nurse in here. I'm just saying.
Mm-hmm. That's weird, yeah.
It was weird, but like they didn't know it was weird. But as a cis-born female, I knew that all it took was the doctor and the nurse to be in there. That's all you need. And in fact, way back when, I just had the doctor in there. But, now they always want to have the nurse in there, but you don't really need to have, like, an auditorium of people there looking.
Okay, so back to the question. What are some general advices you can give to people who are struggling with this concern? Like, for example, should I do conversion? Should I do it as young as possible? Or just, try to... What are your general suggestions in terms of from a life care planning point of view?
From a life care planning point of view, and it's actually called transition, I actually have a case study that I'm going to be talking about next week, and it's where a young boy is becoming increasingly upset and angry and wanting to wear his sister's clothes, and then starts wearing his sister's clothes, and then starts demanding that he be called by a different name. And this started when he was, young, around kindergarten, like being very overt about it. And so then the family just talked about it and talked to the physician about it. And then there's different places around, like the United States and around the world, where you can talk to the physicians and just monitor, like, your loved one to see how much distress they are in. But the dysphoria, if it's true dysphoria, will ramp up as they get older and will not go away. If it's true dysphoria. If it's just like, oh, I want to wear this, I want to wear my brother's clothes, or I want to have a little lace here, or I want to experiment in makeup, that's different. But the dysphoria is an actual distress. It's actual distress. And the DSM, and I have it written here, has actual guidelines for diagnosis of dysphoria, okay? So it's a marked incongruence between one's experienced, expressed gender and assigned gender of at least 6 months duration plus at least 2 of the following: strong desire to be of the other gender, strong desire for primary and or secondary sex characteristics of the other gender, strong desire to be rid of one's primary and or secondary sex characteristics. Furthermore, there should be clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. What I have found is that the people I talk to who have had this surgery have all of these, and for years. And I don't know how they made it. I don't know how they got up every day and went to work or went to high school with this going on. So you just have to have 2 of these. And they say 6 months duration plus at least 2 of the following. Most of the people that I know, years and all of the following.
Because this is actually relatively new, right?
Well, yes, it's relatively, well, it's the dysphoria. It's now seen not as a mental illness. That's new.
And that happened from 2015?
Just a few years ago.
A few years ago. Okay.
Just like now we have, same-sex marriage, whereas we didn't used to have that as well.
Okay.
Everything changes. And this is what I always tell my students. I've worked in medicine long enough to see the changes. Research is wonderful, but it means change. So what you can be sure of is that what you're doing now, you will not be doing later. The way you treat your patients, the medicines you give your patients, the guidelines that we use, everything, it will change. That's the only thing you can be sure of. Same here. Mm-hmm. Okay? What was accepted years ago, will or not be accepted years ago, will be accepted. So all I can hope is that all this stuff that's going on with the LGBTQ, with the different religions, with the different nationalities, will become a thing of the past. Because it's all together. It's all the same. I think people just try to pigeonhole in order to try to make sense of things. And you know what? And sometimes things can't be made sense of. And why can't that be okay?
Yeah,
Why do we have to try to figure everything out?
Science are strong, and that's I won't say obsession or symptom of science, right? We're so confident in building on evidence, and one thing lead to another. Eventually, this thing will give us the whole truth.
But it changes, and the truth is always changing. Everything's always changing. If you look at, like, the world, it used to be flat, now it's round. I mean,
even for science itself, right?
That's what I'm saying. And
not to mention there are something which is not science. You certainly shouldn't
right.
just treat it as science and use scientific method to study it.
Exactly. And so when you talk about the transition in the kids, I'd have to say that it's individual. We can't say, well, if a child starts acting like this, then we must do this. Because my point about science is that medicine, we say it's a science, but it's not, because it changes. Everything changes, okay? And that's why we do research. Otherwise, we would just do research and we would stop right there. And you're to do research until it's saturated. You're to search until everything is saturated, and then you publish, right?
Yep.
But then next year, guess what? You do more research, and it gets saturation, and it changes. And as researchers, we know that even though we can set aside our bias, that there are researchers out there that don't do that, and they publish things that are biased and push information in a certain direction.
Yeah.
So what I have found, as much as I love quantitative, and qualitative is new to me, and it's not considered as rigorous, it's the only way to go with this.
The problem here is that requires a lot of effort. Field the interviews and seeing the patients.
And it's expensive.
Exactly.
Yes, it is.
So, but for quantitative, the easy thing to do is just
send it out there.
Literature review and conduct
Surveys.
some surveys with 30, 50 people. You have a conclusion. Yeah, that's kind of like the danger, because I kind of have this conflict feelings whenever I do sociology science with statistical method, for example. Like, okay, sometimes it's not used in the right way. Sometimes you shouldn't even be using it. And how big is a sample is a sample? How big is a p-value? How big is the regression R-square? And if you don't have something big enough or significant enough, why are you still interpreting the results? Your model is not working, and you still insist I want to do the p-value thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't do so with the qualitative. So it's anthropology. I mean, and anthropology is best done by going and by doing and by talking and by observing and by picking it up and looking at it and smelling it and licking it and playing with it. I mean, that's the way it's done. And when I first started this, I was like, oh, yeah, I can do this quantitatively. But the more I talked to people, the more they told me, thank you for hearing my voice. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for hearing my story. And what I realized was that the same thing that I would tell my graduate students about how they can't treat patients with a cookie cutter type treatment and how we can have a specific treatment, but then you have to look at all the variables and you have to do that profile of that person to make it work for them, is exactly what I wasn't doing when I was doing the quantitative. So the qualitative is most important. You really need to capture the essence of the person. And the essence of this population is loneliness, stigma, discrimination, fear. That's the essence. That's the bottom line. And I wonder why. Why do we have a population of people who live in America, which is the home of the free, who walk around in fear of being emotionally and physically bullied, working hard to make a place for themselves individually in society, and living in constant fear of being homeless, jobless, rejected, basically sent to the back of the bus, if they're even allowed to get on it. Why is that allowed to happen? And then we've got all these political things going on, and where these injustices are being done against this particular population, and they have to go before the judges, and even those judges even decide whether they're even allowed those basic human rights. And oh no, we're going to go ahead and shoot that down because that instance, just happened, but that law was made years ago, so it doesn't really correlate with what happened to you recently. The infraction of the basic human rights. Why is it that basic human rights aren't attached to a child, somebody that comes over here and is working hard in our country, or somebody who identifies as gay, just wants to get married and have a family. I mean, why? And where does it start? I mean, are we just going to give those basic human rights to me, a white female? Or, if I'm like that perfect couple where I have that, whatever that number is, 2.3 children, and I'm married to a white guy and I'm a white girl, and I get all the rights.
Yeah, interesting.
I get more than everybody else. See, they get less than I get more. I get theirs. I mean, what is a basic human right? I mean, we talk about that, but I don't see it happening with this population in particular. I don't see it happening with a lot of populations, but since I'm doing research on this, I'm looking at where are the basic human rights for housing, for jobs, for anything, for safety, for going in and saying, I've just been beat up, and going to a police station and maybe being made fun of, maybe, or not being taken seriously. And many people who identify as transgender and lose their jobs in housing and families, but need the hormones, a lot of them turn to prostitution. I was in that group in Phoenix, and there were many that were having to do that because it's the only way they could make a living. And there's a high prevalence of AIDS and physical abuse. And there's the suicide that's probably not reported. Because who's going to care about a prostitute, right? And I'm not saying
even
that.
Within prostitute, you have like a regular prostitute and transgender prostitute.
Right.
It's going to be even worse, even for this group. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Physical abusement, especially.
Yeah. So, and when I say who's going to care about a prostitute, I'm not saying I feel that way. I'm just saying that, quote unquote, like if you're looking at it in our society, and unfortunately, any TV show that you watch, you'll hear them say, well, it was a prostitute. Then you'll hear like somebody say, well, just because they're a prostitute, then this fight goes on, So yeah, but that's the thought of society. Like, there's definitely a hierarchy with professions and with different races and nationalities and different choices of what we call lifestyles, which I hate to say choice of lifestyle, which, it's not a choice of lifestyle. It's just being.
Yep.
But for the sake of this, I'll just say choice of lifestyle,
Yeah, a lot of people would say, why don't you just live the way I live? Because
it doesn't work for them.
This is what I am.
That's cookie cutter, right?
Yeah.
We're all different.
You keep saying, why are you doing things in the wrong way? No, that's my way.
And what I tell my kids is this, okay? You got your side of the fence. Take care of your side of the fence, okay? Tend to your side of the fence. Okay, if you tend properly to your side of the fence, you don't have time to be worrying about other people's sides of their fences, right? So as long as you're not hurting somebody, then it's fine. Tend to your side of the fence, do no harm, right? And like my son who's going to be the physician, do no harm. Somebody comes in, doesn't matter whether they're this, that, or a combination of all those things, do no harm. And this is what I tell them as well, and this is what I tell my graduate students, and this is how I practiced for almost 30 years. Treat everybody as if they're your own. When they come into the hospital, and that doesn't mean that you take them home with you and you feed them and all that stuff, but it means that you treat everybody the same. You give them the same care. Then you move on to the next person. Give them the same care. If they need to be advocated for, you advocate for them. If they need empathy, then you give them empathy. Treat them as if they're your own.
Interesting. Who are you to judge who deserves and who does not deserve, right? Treat your job professionally. Take your individual responsibility.
Yes.
Then you won't have time to worry about others even.
No.
Right? How many people actually do take individual responsibility nowadays?
Well, if you think about it, with all the stigma going on in hospitals of people of size, then there's a stigma with that, or the ages, and maybe that person that is older and comes in and maybe has a little bit of confusion going on. Oh, they're just old. Well, maybe they have a UTI, or maybe they have something else going on. Maybe they got bit by something. There's a lot of stigmas and a lot of judgments that go on everywhere. But if we treat everybody as if they're our own and don't make assumptions and don't make judgments, then we can be more caring of each other, more respectful of each other, right? Until somebody gives me a reason to not respect them, I'm going to treat them with respect.
Especially you're not in his situation. How do you know what caused that, right?
Exactly. In my classes, we talk about the difficult patient. And I tell them, I say, look, you don't know what kind of news that patient just received that day. You don't know what's going on with them. You don't know if they're worrying about how they're going to pay their medical bills. You don't know if their spouse is filed for divorce. You don't know what was going on before they came in. All you know is why they're there. But if you sit down and you talk with them and you take a care to find out, if you do your profile, and because occupational therapy is holistic, you look at the whole person. You'll find out maybe why they're a difficult patient. Maybe they're just frightened or upset. Or maybe you're the fifth person that's come in there while they've been trying to discreetly use their urinal. I mean, you don't know.
It's a multidimensional image about a person instead of a simplified partial angle view. Same thing with teaching, right? You got a student showing a really, angry face towards you. It's oh, maybe I did give a bad lecture. Maybe the student just had a rough day.
Maybe they have a migraine.
Exactly.
You don't know about them. You don't know what's going on with them, right? Maybe they just heard some really bad news. Maybe their mother or father was just diagnosed with cancer, and they got to finish out the semester, and they don't want to be there, but they have to because they're on a scholarship. I mean, there's all different types of scenarios that you can build. But, that's what I say. You take care of your side of the fence. We treat everybody with the basic human rights. They're here. We treat them with basic human rights. And that's why, like I said, I'm doing this. And it's like I said, I'm not an authority on this. And it doesn't matter whether I agree or disagree. I'm looking at what's right. And that is that I want their voices to be heard. Quantitative is fine. But I did the case study, and I've just written a grant and submitted it, and I'm looking to do a group study, and I'm going to go to Phoenix and work with that group on the same surveys that I gave to the case study for follow-up, because I do want to do the larger group. And I know the group, and they know me, and I've been given permission by the church where they meet, and I've already spoken to the president of Transspectrum, who's lovely, and is willing to help me get this done. So
that's a great effort you're spending there. Now it's just once you have that thing, how to push it to the next level.
I don't know.
To have this thing to reach the decision maker, right? Imagine.
I don't know.
We always want to provide evidence, but
Yeah.
what's after that, right?
Well,
what
yeah.
action are you going to take?
Well, you disseminate.
Yeah.
So I'm disseminating in this way. I'm disseminating with my in the journal, with doing presentations, with just talking one-on-one with people, with just and I have to be careful what I say to my students because they are a captive audience, and I have to look at that power differential. But when they ask me, I certainly tell them. I say, okay, be careful what you ask, because I'll tell you. But this is just what I think, and that's what you have to make your own decision. But most importantly,
take your own risk.
Yeah. But most importantly, as a researcher, I find that this is a beast that has its own course, and I'm just going along for the ride. I'm not trying to guide it. If you would have told me several years ago that I was going to be doing research on this, I would have told you no. Why would I? But it's kind of breathed life into itself. And the more I talk to people who, such as yourself, out in community, or people who identify as transgender, the more I realize that the best way I can be a part of the solution in a tiny way is to do what I'm doing. All we can do is hope to make a tiny contribution. I mean, I'm not going to do anything life-changing. I'm not going to do anything that's going to change the world. But if I can just help in one small way, and that's what I used to tell my patients when they would come to see me, because I worked in critical care, and I would say to them, if I can just work with you and help you in some small way by the time you leave and go to the next level, whether it's rehab or skilled or home, I'll be happy. If you can just learn one thing from me, and if I can help you in one small way.
It's great, your
That's all.
humbleness. And also, I kind of feel what you feel because you simply just cannot ignore it. Whatever contribution you have, you don't care, but you just simply cannot ignore it anymore.
No, it's true.
And I kind of trying to, what I see here is you're trying to call on the common values, the common virtues,
Yes.
back again, just like what's the bottom line.
Yes.
There are so many things that are relative, like what you think is right, I don't think is right, but should be a basic agreement
Yes.
that but that's gonna be I won't say that's gonna be a challenging journey, but I hope you can go further and further in that way, and I really would like to actually interview you later.
Okay.
After I want to wait for a long enough period
Yes.
to try to see, hey, if that's not working, are we going in the right direction? Are we getting worse? But just one comment I want to use to close the conversation today, which I think is super inspiring. You're talking about transgender people and aging people and all these different groups.
Mm-hmm.
I remember once I was talking with I don't remember who was that is. He was an elder, but I remember what he said permanently for my life. That is, treat the elder nicely because one day you will be old.
Yes.
For aging group, it's eventually you will be in their shoe.
Yes.
That's probably a way for me every time I see elders. It's just like, wow, just picture when I'm that old. I'm energetic right now, but I may have a broken leg within 30 years. I may not be able to get up myself.
Yeah.
How do I want to be treated? So it's easy for me to relate. But now, if you can get this message, now try to picture yourself in not just the aging group, all the other groups, in their shoes,
Yes.
to understand why they're doing what they're doing, why they hate what they hate, why they curse what they curse. They seem like not nice people. And then think about why they are like that. Especially when you talk about a story about transgender people, I just try to put myself in their shoes. I found it a very, very hard to do. It's a dilemma. Like, you do it, the transition, dead end. You don't do it, dead end. Suicide, dead end. Move out of your home, dead end. We at least need to give, hopefully, a community that at least there is one way, even though maybe it's not the perfect way or best way, but at least one way that is not a dead end.
Yes, and that's a good way to look at it because you're right. And think about once they have the surgery, I mean, there's no going back, and
there's no going forward either, seems like.
Well, if that is the environment they're living in, see, because like I said, the gender dysphoria, once that distress of I'm just not in the right body is gone, if they can actually be in an accepting society where they accept their bodies and they accept themselves, then imagine how wonderful that would be.
And that's really the part we need to work on.
Well, and just think about this. Okay, I mean, I have seen this might be a better analogy. I remember one time I saw this woman who was in her late teens, and she was a nurse, and I was living in Texas at the time, and she had the worst, like, the way her teeth had come in. They were sticking out and going in all different directions, and it was such a distraction that you couldn't even see the rest of her body and her face just because her teeth went everywhere. She got braces, and within probably 2.5 to 3 years, because we worked together, her teeth straightened out. And she had teeth removed, and I watched this whole journey with her. She was beautiful by Western standards. After her teeth were straightened, I realized she had a beautiful mouth. She had that perfect bow mouth and high cheekbones and really bright eyes. And I noticed the difference in her and how people would treat her. Okay? So her confidence improved. So I could tell that inside she learned to like herself. And outside, people started accepting her more. Imagine living in a body where you didn't like yourself because you didn't accept yourself, but also society didn't accept you as well. Mm-hmm. But when you finally did start liking yourself, as much as you liked yourself, society shunned you. Mm-hmm. Well, that's basically what a lot of the people that I talk to say it is like for them, at least initially while they're transitioning. Although now when they get to the end of their transition, if they can, quote unquote, pass then things can be better for them. But then they still have that stigma of going to the doctor and how the dead name will keep coming up, and having to feel like they have to constantly explain, and then also meeting somebody and feeling like they need to tell them, like maybe like say it's a male to female, and then being able to saying, well, I don't have ovaries. The fear of like when they should disclose, especially if they love that person, they don't want to lose them because the person doesn't maybe know. And then that person that they meet has to deal with the fact that, oh, does that make me a homosexual? I mean, but really, why should it matter? Why can't they just say, this is who I am, and then just take it from there?
Well, that's a beautiful way to end it. So thank you so much for joining us. That was very informative.
Yeah.
And like I said, I will actually be in touch, and within hopefully 3-4 years, I want to see where the research, especially the study from the grant, and what you found there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.